Good morning, everyone. I'm Olivia Hollaus for Boca Magazine, and it's time for another coffee break with managing partner Marius Ged of Ged Lawyers, and he has his coffee mug right there. And we are also chatting with J. Albert Johnson, senior trial counselor, with an impressive list of high-profile cases representing some of the biggest personalities in our country, as well as huge corporations. It's so great to see you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Olivia. Great to see you as well.
Good to be here.
Well, we are definitely talking about a very timely topic, the Supreme Court of the United States. And Al, you were mentioning that you are a member of the bar of the Supreme Court of the US. So, you are one of the few attorneys who has argued a case of the Supreme Court. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I am a member of the bar. I have been a member of the bar of the United States Supreme Court. Of an interesting note, I think I was sponsored to become a member of the bar of the Supreme Court by a fellow named Edward M. Kennedy, the late Edward M. Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, who was not only a close friend, but a client of mine for many, many, many years. So I was very proud to be sworn into the bar of the United States Supreme Court at the Supreme Court many years ago. I think that the most important thing that people ask me now, with the concurrence of the nomination of Amy Barrett to the court, is, what's the story? What is the Supreme Court? And what are the courts of the United States? Most people don't understand the operations of the court, of the Supreme Court, and of the other courts. So I thought it might be interesting if I started off by saying, of course, the Supreme Court of the United States is the highest court of the land. That goes without saying. So when cases wind through from a local jurisdiction up to the Supreme Court of the United States, it's a long, long road. There's a thing called separation of powers, which has been mentioned in the televised programming of the nomination of Judge Barrett. The separation of powers is very simple, but not understood by many. It means that there are three organizations, if you will, which run the United States of America. Three branches of government. One is the legislative branch. That is composed of the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives, the Congress of the United States. Those are people who make the laws that we are compelled to follow. The executive branch of government are those in government who enforce the laws, such as the FBI, the CIA, and so forth, and culminating and leading to the President of the United States, who is the head of the executive branch of government. So, the executive branch carries out the laws which are passed by the legislative branch of government. That's what the executive is supposed to do. Make sure that people comply with the law, which is brought ahead by the Congress of the United States in the case of the federal government. The judicial branch of government, which is now being headlined on television, the judicial branch of government are judges who pass upon the legality of the laws which are passed by the Congress, by the House of Representatives, and by the Senate in the federal level. They pass upon those laws based upon many things, many considerations. When a case comes up to the Supreme Court, and indeed, the Supreme Court only hears probably 60 cases a year. I think that's the latest figure of the many hundreds of cases which apply to the Supreme Court to be heard. The Supreme Court takes into, that is the justices, takes into account the importance of those cases for the inhabitants of this country, for the 300 million people who live here. And if they are important enough, the Supreme Court will hear them and decide those cases. And when the Supreme Court decides those cases by a majority of the 9 judges who sit on the Supreme Court, then that becomes the law of the land, as they say. And that is the law, finality of the law, which the executive, the President of the United States, and the different branches of the executive must follow. So, importantly, 3 branches of government. Legislative branch makes the laws. Executive branch, the president, enforces the laws. And the judicial branch, which interprets the laws and makes sure that they are constitutionally okay, if you will. Now, when the Supreme Court decides those cases, they have to look at a number of things. 1, is this case of such importance as it should be decided by the Supreme Court? That's the first step. They usually act upon what is called a writ of certiorari. I had 3 of those writs of certiorari before the Supreme Court of the United States. If they deem it's important enough as an issue which ought to be brought before the United States Supreme Court, then they say, okay, we're going to allow certiorari. If they don't, they refer it to the lower court, that is the court below, the United States Court of Appeals, and let the decision stand as it was. Now, of great importance, I think, to people in the state of Florida is that in Florida, judges are elected, not appointed.
Right.
That's a strange thing to some people coming from the Northeast, where I come from originally 30 years ago.
That's not the case, right?
Judges are appointed.
Mm-hmm.
And people sometimes find that's objectionable because they say judges are appointed and become anointed.
Mm-hmm.
And because they have lifetime tenure, because they don't have to run for re-election or retention, that's a bad thing. In the state of Florida, judges are elected or in sometimes appointed. If the judge vacancy comes in a judicial branch of government in the state of Florida, then the governor appoints someone. That's appointment. That judge must serve at the pleasure of the electorate, because although judges are appointed for a term of years, he has to run for retention.
Mm-hmm.
So now on the ballot, at least in the county of Palm Beach, there are 3 judges running for retention on the Supreme Court of Florida, and there are, I think, only 1 judge opening in the Palm Beach County, that is in the Circuit Court. Now, how many courts are there? Many, 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 many courts. There are courts of original jurisdiction. That means district courts where small cases are adjudicated. And they may seem small to those of us as lawyers who are in court every day, but to the people who are parties to those cases, they're very, very important. Assault and battery cases, criminal cases,
Right.
Driving under the influence cases, criminal cases. Those kinds of things are very, very important to the litigants, that is, to the prosecutor and to the defendant. Very important. Those cases are heard in county court, generally. Now, if the case is of such importance that it rises to the position of being a felony, that is, it requires a term in prison, which defines it as a felony, then those cases are heard in the circuit court. In both instances, you can apply for a jury trial. Now, we're on the criminal side. This system of justice that we have is not perfect,
Right.
not by any means at all. On the criminal side, on the civil side, it's not perfect. But the system of justice we have, that is trial by jury, is the best yet devised by man for his own judgment, for his own governance. It works. Does it work all the time? Doesn't. And I'm sure you can point, and I can point, many cases where you say that just wasn't the right verdict. But it's the best we have. It's the best way, a decision made by a judgment of your peers, as they say, by people, regular people who sit in juries and determine what the facts of the case are and how they apply to the particular case. And then the judge decides and applies the law as far as sentencing is concerned. On the civil side of the district courts, that is the lower courts, is cases involving divorces. Those cases are heard in family court. Cases involving child separation, child abuse cases, custody of children. Those kinds of things are heard in the family courts. They're very, very important. Those cases are heard by a judge sitting by himself, not with a jury, but by himself, who makes and determines the facts as presented to him and awards custody, or sits on a divorce case and awards a division of the marital assets, as we say. So those are the cases that come in the district court. Now, in addition to that, civil cases come there, motor vehicle accident cases, all kinds of litigation involving corporate entities. We live in a very litigious society. That's just because we are the most industrialized country in the world. And by the nature of the fact that we have so many competing entities in the world, we're bound to have disagreements.
Right.
And those disagreements often lead to the litigation. That's called civil litigation. Those cases are heard sometimes by a judge, a bench trial, as we call it, sometimes by a jury trial, although less often by a jury trial. Some of the big cases you hear about against some of the big companies, Johnson Johnson, those big companies, some of those cases are heard in the federal jury system first. Now, in the state courts, the appeal of a case from a judge or from a jury goes to a district court of appeal. And all of the districts, the judicial districts in the state of Florida have judges sitting in district court DCA cases. And those cases are heard by judges sitting in those district court appellate conditions. If one is unhappy with the judgment of the district court of appeal, they can appeal to the Supreme Court of the state of Florida. Same thing applies with the state of Florida as applies to the United States Supreme Court. They take only those cases which they decide are worthy or of such importance that they need to take those to establish an enlightened presence of what the law really is. And those Supreme Court judges make the same decisions that are made in the Supreme Court of the United States. They determine whether or not those cases reach the point where they comport with the Constitution, which they comport with the evidence which is brought forward, whether the judge in the district courts applied the right law to the right evidence, and whether or not the jury system was complied with to the extent where it doesn't constitute an abuse of the system. It's very, very important because, as I mentioned before, in one of my cases, which did in fact go to the Supreme Court of the United States, the jurors in that case were influenced by things which really they shouldn't have been. Mm-hmm. They were influenced by the fact that my client took the Fifth Amendment when asked about an activity which had nothing to do with the case on trial. That was an abuse of that jury system. Those kinds of cases where the jury should not have heard matters which came to their attention, those go to the Supreme Court of the state of Florida. Now, in arguing about whether or not judges should be elected or appointed.
That was my question, yeah. What do you think? And also, Marty, what do you think about that?
There are many reasons why we think that judges should be appointed, and many reasons why we think judges should be elected. Uh-huh. If a judge is appointed, it's generally because he's of the same political party as the governor. Goes without saying. And the governor appoints those to the bench who he believes will not only be good judges, and that is decide questions of fact and law in the court, fact if they're sitting alone, or law if they're sitting with a jury, appropriately, but also whether or not they have the same philosophy, judicial philosophy, which you've heard a lot about in the case of Amy Barrett. Yeah. You know, in the state of Florida, where judges are elected, they're put through a vetting process. And often, and many lawyers say that's a far better system, because when they're running for office, their entire background is laid out. The history of that judge is laid out to the point where the electorate now comes in to the ballot box, to the polling place, and selects a judge whose background in the law is more appropriate for them to become judges. And it has great merit rather than the appointing system. So they both have merit.
Right.
I've tried cases before judges in, as I said, 33 states, some by elected judges and many by appointed judges. And I can honestly say, I've found some real good judges who are elected. I've found some real good judges who are appointed. So it's a difference in the state constitution as to whether or not judges are elected or whether they are appointed. In the excuse me.
No, go ahead, Al. Go ahead.
In the federal system, these are cases which arise out of a violation or an application of federal law. There's a federal district court. There's a federal district court in Palm Beach. There's a federal district court in Fort Lauderdale, a federal district court in every one of the states in different locations. The duty of the federal court is simply to take those cases where there's federal law involved, or where there's what we call diversity of citizenship, where there's two jurisdictions competing. That is, the defendant comes from one jurisdiction, the plaintiff comes from another jurisdiction, and the federal case ends up in the federal court. Federal judges sit with juries. Federal judges sit on the bench without juries. When you appeal a case in the federal court from a decision of a judge or a sentence of a judge, you appeal to the Circuit Court of Appeals. The Circuit Court of Appeals for the state of Florida, the Circuit Court of Appeals for the state of Massachusetts or other states, is an independent organization. These are judges who sit not with a jury. They sit alone sometimes and determine whether or not a case should be overturned. And oftentimes they sit what we call en banc. That is, with a number of judges in that circuit court hearing those cases. If one is aggrieved by or unhappy with the decision of the Circuit Court of Appeals in the federal system, they can appeal to the United States Supreme Court. And that's why the United States Supreme Court is of such great importance. They decide only those cases of great national importance or great constitutional issue that they ought to hear those cases. That's why this confirmation hearing, which is going on right now involving Judge Barrett, is so important, because those 9 people on that Supreme Court decide cases which affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in the United States. So their duty is the culmination of all kinds of matters which occur in the lower courts. And it's become very, very important because of its nature. Only those cases which are extremely important are heard by the Supreme Court of the United States.
Right, it's huge. And clearly the judicial system is so complex. Are you a professor by any chance, Al? Because that was so information heavy. I mean, it's so intricate.
You know, it's a great, he's a great orator, and he's very learned in the area of the law. But I got to tell you a quick story. My daughter last year was in 3rd grade, and they were learning about the branches of government.
Mm-hmm.
And we brought her whole 3rd grade class into our law firm, and we have a courtroom, and Al played judge.
Oh, cool.
A real case where Al acted as the judge. He put the robe on, and we let the kids present the case. And the case was a motor vehicle accident where the person was texting and driving.
Ah.
And it was really relevant to the kids because everyone's parent, unfortunately, or their kids see their parents sometimes texting and driving. But it also demonstrated and displayed the different branches of government, and we tried to educate them of the different branches of government, how they all interplay. And the 3rd graders loved it. It was a big hit.
What a great experience.
This year, but COVID hit and we had to cancel it. But
that's really great. if I mean, you're both attorneys, but you know, if the opportunity presented itself and you could become a judge, is that something you would want, or you just like litigating and being attorneys?
So I would not want to be a judge. And the reason I would not want to be a judge is you can't express your opinions and you can't fight for the little guy. And it's a wonderful thing to be a judge, no disrespect to any judge out there. But I want to be on the team fighting. I don't want to be a neutral party. And I want to be rambunctious. I want to be able to represent my client zealously and fight for those rights. If you're a judge, you are obviously a very learned person and understand the application of the law, and that's a great thing, but you can't advocate for anything. So that's not where I want to be.
What about you, Al?
Yeah, same thing. I've had the opportunity over the years to accept judgeship in different courts, in the federal system and the state system. And I've declined that opportunity because I felt that my place was as an advocate for those who cannot represent themselves, and to represent those people and to try to convince judges and jurors to my client's point of view, where they're unable to do that by themselves. So I chose to conduct myself as a trial attorney rather than go on the bench for that reason.
Right, that's great. And Marty, you've mentioned that Al is a mentor. What have you learned from him?
I learn something every day.
I
The
bet.
man has a wealth of legal knowledge. He has a legal mind that is as sharp as anyone a third of his age and has so much energy. And one of my Al colloquialisms is nothing is for free. And it relates to a client, and it relates to a client relationship, how we all have friends and family, and the saying is nothing for nothing is nothing. And look, your mom calls you, your dad calls you, asks you to do a favor. Obviously, you're not going to try to charge your mom, but everyone knows a lawyer, and everyone asks a lawyer to do them a favor, and you want to just generally help people. That's kind of the nature of the beast. But when you provide something for nothing, it's nothing, because the people don't see the value in it, and they think that you're not taking it seriously if there's not an agreement in place. And it just kind of dilutes the relationship. And then at the end, you're going to either lose a friend or they're going to get upset you didn't do something. So we have a saying, nothing for nothing is nothing. Now,
Right.
That doesn't mean we don't do a lot of pro bono work. We don't help people out. That's not the issue. But there has to be a value perceived and a value gained by both parties.
Absolutely. Everything that's worth something, has a value. So yeah. That's a good tip.
You know, Marty mentioned the fact that his daughter, with her class, came to our courtroom at Ged Lawyers. And it was a great lesson, I think, to see how the system works. We had two lawyers there who actually litigated a case in front of them. And they were very, very quiet and absorbed with what they saw. And I think that speaks loudly about the fact that, there's very little teaching of civics in our elementary schools nowadays. And I think that's a terrible mistake. I think it's a mistake as a lawyer. I think it's a mistake, and as a citizen. I think the civics courses which are taught regarding our courts, our system of government, are really sorely lacking. So if there's any one thing that I think that any parents who might be listening, they ought to really, really listen to the educators who think that civics should be a great part of their elementary education, because of the fact that this is the country they're going to grow up in. This is the country they're going to excel in. This is the country that they're going to make a living in. This is the country that they're going to conduct themselves appropriately. And they really ought to know how the system works. As I said, best system yet devised.
Agreed. And that's why it's so important to also vote, because that is part of your civic duty as a citizen, right? So
It certainly is.
Couldn't agree more. Last question, since we're talking about the Supreme Court, what's your favorite landmark in Washington, D.C., Marty?
Oh, I love the Lincoln Monument. That's so impressive to me. I went there 2 years ago with my family, and I was totally floored by that and impressed.
And what about you, Al?
I would have to say, of course, the Supreme Court of the United States. I think it's the hallmark of what we strive for every day as lawyers. That is to make sure, in the best way that we can, to ensure that the laws of this country and the laws of this state, laws of the communities in which we live, are carried out in a way that is beneficial to every citizen.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for a super, super informative session with us today. It's always so great having you. Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia.
Thank you, Olivia.
And to our viewers, thank you for joining us. Until then, have a wonderful day, a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
See you soon.